So is AT&T on the brink of shutting down DC Comics for good? Well, that's what Forbes seems to think. But how true is that? Hey there, this is Perch. Some news that came out a few days ago, and you might have missed it, but probably didn't because there's been a lot of speculation and videos that were attached and spawned off of it. Was this little article in Forbes, to be clear, Forbes.com, not Forbes, but the online site. And that'll become important in a minute. But the article basically speculated that AT&T was possibly on the verge of shutting down DC Comics for good. That they didn't like the fact that it wasn't as profitable as they wanted. They used some statistics around the comics used to sell 100,000 and now they don't. And this is a lot of speculation that's followed. And it really was rooted in this idea that at Comic Con this year, DC Comics was kind of folded in, merged with the Time Warner booth and that whole area. And so, proof that with this acquisition that's taken place, AT&T was going to, they had no interest in the comic business, were about to shut it down and be gone. And of course, unfortunately, this feeds a kind of larger narrative that's been going around on social media a lot lately, which is, everything is in danger of imminent collapse. Marvel, DC, they're just on the verge of their parent companies getting angry and firing everyone and shutting down comics, and there being no comics. And it's one of those things where I I get really frustrated with articles and speculation, and in particular the endless videos that follow on this stuff, because it doesn't help. It doesn't help the fact that there are problems in comics. There are legitimate, real problems to be solved. There is weakness in the business. There's significant concerns, as we've talked about, and I've talked about a lot. And when you push it to this apocalypse, like everything is completely doomed, it it basically it gives cover to the little problems, because the people who are running the business know that it's not as extreme as that, and it gives them, you're basically giving them a gift. You're giving them the ability not to respond to the problems and to the real issues, and instead call you a lunatic because you're saying that DC is going to shut down next month. That's why I get frustrated about this, because I see this stuff as hiding problems. Ultimately, it just hides problems. So, what is the truth? Well, and hey, this article was in Forbes, right? So that's a legitimate news source. It's not like a Bleeding Cool or some other trash site. It's Forbes. Well, first off, go ahead and Google "how do I write for Forbes," and you'll see a couple articles and a couple things pull up. The reality is there's Forbes staff writers, and then there's Forbes contributors, and those are two different things. The first is a very well vetted cover story, going to repurpose and market, going to push this across a bunch of different channels, and in particular for investment and other things. And the second, the contributors, is basically you wrote an article, you promised them an exclusive, you submitted it, and they published it. It doesn't require any of the vetting or the source gathering or anything else. And a lot of the contributor articles go up, get down. There's a Washington Post story recently about a horribly inaccurate contributor article that got so much attention they had to pull it and retract it and a bunch of other things. But really, what they're doing is filling pages. They're filling clicks, and they need content, and so it's a world of content. And then so Forbes is soliciting these articles like a bunch of sites do. If any of you listening to this wanted to really set your mind on getting an article on Forbes.com, all of you can do it pretty quickly. By this time next month, you could have an article there if you just, write something, source it well, sound professional, and kind of most importantly, tap into something where there's some interest, like comics. When you have Avengers Endgame being the number one movie of all time, then yeah, the editors and the people who are curating these sites will give preference to articles that are going to talk about comics, and particularly if they sound contradictory. So it's like, Avengers Endgame makes more money than any other movie of all time. Comics are awesome, right? Well, think again, because AT&T might be dumping DC. That is a nice, juicy hook. It's perfect. The problem is it's all speculation, and it is a pure speculation article. but the fact that it carries that Forbes banner, and the fact that it's written as if there's some facts. The facts kind of weave in and out with speculation. And the big example of this was the comment about, once upon a time, DC had a major, huge booth on the floor, and now they're tucked away in a corner, kind of hidden in the Time Warner booth. Well, again, this isn't accurate. If you actually went to Comic Con and you went to things, that's a pretty extreme read of things. It's an exaggeration. DC has had a major presence. Their presence has moved around a bit. They typically maintain the same floor space, but a lot of things changed for Comic Con last year and this year in 2018 and 19. And there were a number of shifts that were made to the layout and to booths. And DC had a bunch of shifts last year. The article did not comment on any of that, but there were some changes that were made. And this year, they were part of the Time Warner booth, part of that whole area. But to call them tucked away in a corner is, yeah, that's a very cruel way of looking at something. I mean, for reference, Microsoft and the Xbox booth is tucked away in a corner at E3, the big gaming convention. Sony is usually tucked away in a corner. Now that they're still a huge mega booth, and the Time Warner booth was massive, and they clearly spent a ton of money on it. And so to kind of portray it, and especially for people who don't go, like, oh, DC Comics is kind of hidden away as if in shame, which is kind of how the article made it sound. That's not accurate. You can see the photos for yourself. You can go look at 2019 Comic Con, and that's not at all accurate. And DC still had panels, and they still had top billing, and they still had a bunch of marketing events, and they still had money pumped into the gas lamp area for different projects and different promotions, as much as before. And I don't have access to those marketing dollars, and that chart, of course, is within the company. But it's a pretty safe bet that if you looked at the last 5 years of marketing spend for DC on Comic-Con, you would not see a dip this year. In fact, if anything, you'd probably see a slight increase because it's been increasing for some time. I'll reach out and see if I can get a firm word on this from somebody within the company. But anyway, it's just, unfortunately, the article kind of anchors onto that point of, it makes two claims, one of which is factual, one of which is an exaggeration. The factual one is AT&T purchased basically these properties, purchased DC, and they were now part of the AT&T portfolio. That's a dry, kind of emotionless fact. There's not a lot of speculation or anything there. It's just a fact. Okay, that in and of itself doesn't mean anything. But then comes the bigger, that's quickly followed by, and at Comic-Con, the big comic booth, they hid DC. Now that's not factual. It's an exaggeration. And then everything else in the article kind of builds on those two ideas of, like, do you really think AT&T would want a comic book business? I mean, who would want a comic book business? Well, a lot of people would want a comic book business. Let's go back to the reason this article was probably published in the first place, which is Avengers Endgame just made more money than any film in Hollywood and ever, unless you count inflation and other things, and not at all. But whatever. But it made a ton of money. Beat Avatar. Big comic properties are still hot, despite what you see on social media, despite the doom and gloom of, any day now, comic book properties are going to collapse, and then there will be no more comics. And the comics industry, as we talked about, is going to change. I'm not going to go back and retread that ground again, but it absolutely is going to change. But to claim that, at the same time as comic book IP is generating billion-dollar films, and those will dip too, but they're not going to dip tomorrow. This is the thing people need to understand about the market. It's not like one day you wake up and there's a movie that's worth $1 billion, and then the next movie that comes down the pipe 2 months later is going to make nothing. Now, wait, you say, what about X-Men? X-Men was a huge bomb. Clearly, that's evidence that the comic book business is collapsing. Not really. The X-Men movie, the Dark Phoenix movie, was always going to bomb. The marketing was so half-assed. Everybody had heard, DC or Marvel, Disney purchased Fox, X-Men's coming into the MCU. None of this is going to matter. Even casual people going to the film who are not part of the comics heard the message, this film is not going to matter. And what's a good way to kill all interest in that film? To say it's not going to matter. But if you were to hook off that and say, see, this is evidence that the entire comic book business is about to implode, yeah, I see where you draw that conclusion, but it's a false conclusion. And to further that up, Amazon releases The Boys on their streaming service, which has been there's some success to Prime, but it's nowhere near Netflix, and it doesn't have the buzz and the marketing around Netflix. But yet, The Boys is one of their top, and maybe their top series that has come out on the platform. Again, another comic book thing. Happened after Dark Phoenix. What does this tell us? It tells us that if the property is good and people, there's some good buzz about it, it's marketed well, and people are told to care about it, they'll care about it. Just like in comics, just like in movies. But back to this article. So, we go on and on about, will AT&T want DC in their portfolio? Well, AT&T has a lot of things on their portfolio. You can check out their annual report, which is available to anyone. Just, again, go to Google. There it is. And you'll see that AT&T and their holdings have hundreds. In fact, if you really kind of get super specific about it and count up every kind of IP holding and every patent hold, not the patents, but conglomerates that hold patents for them, you'll get to over 1,000 holdings within the AT&T Time Warner, mega corporation. For what it's worth, Disney has more than 2,000. And to say that a bunch of eyes are on DC is inaccurate. They're not. DC makes money. It doesn't bleed cash. It creates IP that, in fairness, they have not been able to capitalize on with the DC shared universe, but they are still putting stuff out. Shazam made money. The Birds of Prey movie is going to be marketed, and there's hopes it will make money. Wonder Woman is going to be heavily marketed. AT&T is more than happy as they gear up to what they think is going to be a head-to-head battle against Disney. AT&T Time Warner wants superhero properties in their arsenal, and that includes things like Batman and Superman, which are arguably better, more well-known properties than what Marvel has. So to AT&T, it's not, oh my God, we got to dump DC Comics. It's a matter of time. It's a matter of time before they figure out how to make these properties work for them. And so, and beyond that, more than half of their holdings are losing money, significant amounts of money. So why is AT&T, who's in this space, who desperately needs to transition themselves into an entertainment entity because a pure cellular provider, pure wired provider is diminishing returns over time? They've already lost a lot of that value because in the days prior to the iPhone or Google or Android phones, they controlled a lot of that mobile ecosystem. The iPhone changed that. More of that power shifted to Apple and to Google and to Samsung and to LG and to others. So they need to make this transition into entertainment. You just bought, the number 2, and I guarantee you, and nobody at AT&T is looking at it that way, comic company with the number 1 recognizable properties in the world. Are they going to dump those? Because why? You're the Villain didn't sell as much? The whole notion of, comics used to sell 100,000 and now they don't. Well, first of all, once again, with returnability, those numbers were not accurate either. Comics were not selling consistently at that rate even then. But who at AT&T, I just want you to picture for a moment the boardroom of AT&T. You got a bunch of high-level executives are making multi-billion-dollar decisions. And now I want you to imagine that somewhere in the agenda of the hour meeting that they have, which them all getting in a room together is probably a once in a quarter event anyway, because these guys are all off running their own businesses and doing their own things. But imagine in this event that they're going, okay, we have a 1 hour agenda. Let's spend some time discussing comic book sales in the 80s, where comic books were selling 100,000 copies, and now they're selling in the 50s. It's a 50% decline. And on top of that, Tom King Batman went from 120,000 to 89,000 copies sold. Oh no, what are we going to do? I just want you to try and picture in your head that conversation happening and understand how absolutely ludicrous how it is. It's not. They are not counting that money anywhere close to that. Now, again, Is the comic business going to change and evolve? Absolutely. Are there major, major problems within the comic industry? Absolutely. There absolutely are. We need to keep focus on those problems and stop getting distracted with silliness. Silliness like, hey, I think the booth was not as big as it was last year, and I don't like that I'm used to going to it over in kind of the center right, and now it's way over there on the left. That's silly. And to get kind of hooked into that and to go, well, but I don't know, comics aren't selling what they used to. I don't know. Go into an AT&T store and ask somebody. Well, I mean, unfortunately, they're all too young and they're clerks and they don't care. I mean, AT&T used to have a multi-billion-dollar business. Maybe not billion, probably over its course of its life, but millions, hundreds of millions of dollars selling wallpapers and ringtones on phones. Today, that business is zero because, again, the iPhone came out and they don't own that business anymore. That's a major shift. That's one that took AT&T almost 10 years to wrap their heads around. Do you really think that they are paying attention to Tom King Batman and some complaints on social media about their creators showing their butts when they're dealing with those kinds of decisions? They're not. It's so far beneath them. DC is going to get a mandate through all this. Their mandate is going to be stay profitable, explore new business ventures, explore a ton of licensing and marketing potential, do as much of that as humanly possible. Don't get any of us, meaning the corporate overlords, the senior manager, the executives, don't make us have to come in and pay any attention to your business whatsoever because we don't have time for it. And serve up some IP for our movie division so they can capitalize on it. Your business is to be a nice licensing, merchandising, entertainment IP farm for this. Do that. That's what they're going to get told. And the business is going to shift to conform to that. But shut it down? No, that's crazy. Anyway, there you go. 17 minutes on a topic that I find ludicrous, but there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of video and speculation based on the imminent destruction of DC Comics. So, for what it's worth, you can upvote, downvote. You can say, no, I heard it on blah 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 blah's show, and they say it's going to die within the year, and they're right. I know they're right. I mean, go for it. If that's what you want to believe, nobody's stopping you. Come talk to me again in a year. Let's see where things are at. Meanwhile, I'll just leave it this. And again, you hear the passion in my voice why I'm so irritated about this topic. We've got problems to solve, folks. We have big problems to solve. Those problems are not going to get solved if we're paying attention to piddly nonsense and fake articles about silliness that just discredits everyone who buys into it. It discredits you. It causes people to ignore you. You don't want to be ignored. So let's stick to the real issues. I can't stress that enough. Your voice matters. So let's make sure that it's heard. Oh, well. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts. Tell me where I'm wrong. I get happy to hear where I'm wrong. Hey, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's some hidden poison pill in there that I'm completely ignoring, and I'm living with my head in the happy clouds. Just hooray, hooray. Let me know. That sounds sarcastic. I didn't mean it that way. I meant it honestly. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification. Tell a friend. Most importantly, tell a friend. We're closing in on 800 subscribers. I cannot believe it. I'm very thankful to all of you. And have a great day. Thank you for listening.